Welcome to the Capstone Conversation, where you learn about what's happening in the greater East Bay. I am your host, Jared Asch. Today, we are talking about school buses. This episode talks about the California electric grid, resiliency, sustainability, power needs, student health, electrification, and more than just those big yellow buses. Listen to how it ties together. I'm joined by Kevin Matthews of First Student, one of the largest school bus providers and managers in the country. Kevin and I have known each other for 14, 15 years. We used to work together. He has been one of the originators and leaders in electrifying school buses across the entire country and is well respected in that field. Kevin, thanks for joining us today. Can you tell us a little bit more about yourself and the company?
Thanks, Jared. Thanks for having me. I do appreciate it. First Student is the largest operator of school buses in North America. To put that in perspective, the U.S. airline industry set a record for the number of passengers at 2.87 million. Let's round it up, 2.9 million passengers. The airline industry moved on that Friday before Memorial. That same Friday, First Student moved 2.7 million children in the morning and 2.7 million children in the afternoon. It's a very large transportation company that not a lot of people understand. And a lot of people don't really understand how large the school bus industry is. In the United States, 27 million children a day ride a school bus to school and then back home that afternoon. It's larger than the airline industry and the transit industry combined in terms of the number of people moved. And that's over 460,000 school buses on the streets of our communities, and over 13,000 school districts. It's a very large transportation system that most people don't really recognize. You saw a school bus pass you in your neighborhood, and that's the way that most people think about it. It's a neighborhood kind of community thing, but it's actually the largest transportation system in the United States. First Student is pleased to be the largest of those operators. We operate about 46,000 school buses in 44 states and also 6 provinces of Canada. For about 1,300 school districts. Very proud of the work we do there. On the electric side, we made a commitment to electrify 30,000 of our school buses by the year 2035. We currently operate 362 electric school buses today. And I like to throw that word in there, operate, because in the school bus industry, you'll see various people say they're the largest, this, that, or the other. But we operate more school buses on a daily basis than any other single school bus entity out there. And we add about 10 school buses per month, electric school buses into our fleet. We have 100 on order at this point in time that we're adding to the fleet over the next 18 months. That's a real high level, quick overview of the school bus industry and First Student.
Over 11 years, if I did quick math, you're talking 8% of the school buses would be converted to?
Nationwide, for First Student, it would be over 75% of our fleet. In other school operators like First Student, the private contractors are also making significant headways to electrify their fleets. And the school districts that own and operate their own fleets are making progress. In California, you lead the country in the number of electric school buses operating. It's several thousand. And California really leads this area.
Is the operations model turnkey where you guys maintain the buses? Do the drivers work for you?
When a school district looks to transition, outsource its student transportation operations to a contractor like First Student, that's generally what they do. We are a soup to nuts provider. We hire the driver, we train the driver, hire the mechanics, train them, do the routing, do all the maintenance, operate the buses, replace the buses as need be, do the insurance, the whole area as it relates to outsourcing. And more school districts are transferring or transitioning to that model because, let's face it, you're a school superintendent, you have a PhD in education, you didn't take any transportation classes. So why not transition your transportation to people that's all they do is think about transporting kids every day?
How is the hiring, particularly in the Bay Area, for bus drivers and mechanics? Because we've interviewed some of the larger public transit agencies, and they talk about how that continues to be a problem post-COVID.
It's tough. It's a very tough environment. Here we are 2 days after Labor. We're recording this, and and all the schools are back up and running. This is the time of year when you see that media. The school bus driver shortages cause delays, cause kids not be picked up. It's a major issue. First student had gotten back to pre-COVID levels of driver staffing. Now, we were still short prior to COVID, but at least the COVID bug, so to speak, has worked its way through, and now we're into the more quote unquote traditional driver shortage era. And look, we've had to change how we recruit. The world has changed, so we have to recruit differently. We have entire teams dedicated to recruiting drivers. It's one thing to get somebody to fill out an application. It's another to get them to come in for the interview. Another thing for them to get them to complete the background check. Another thing for them to accept the job once the offer is made. And we have to take them through driver training. Every state has a different requirement for a school bus driver. And most require a commercial driver's license with the school bus endorsement. We have to take them through all that process. In California, for instance, the problem we run into is that a member of the state highway patrol themselves have to administer the final test to the drivers. We schedule that. That highway patrol member gets called out to a car accident somewhere, probably your daughter will be creating someday, Jared, and have to respond to that. And now all of those training sessions have been canceled. And so now we have to rebook all of those people to come back again another day. And so it's just a bureaucratic problem that's prohibiting moving the trainees swiftly through the system now accurately. We want them to be appropriately certified, appropriately trained to do that. But there are more effective ways that could get drivers behind the wheel. Because once they get behind the wheel, once they're earning a paycheck, you're much better off with that. They're going to stick around. But when we lose so many people, as we call it, the funnel, from the number of people who've applied all the way down to here, we lose so many people who just stop for lots of different reasons during that long funnel process.
And do they get paid during the funnel process?
Some parts of it is we do paid training, of course. So when they're in the shop doing training, driving around training and doing that, when they're doing their coursework, doing that, yes. But it's not like it's a full-time job. It's only when they're in the office at the facility doing their various training components, they're being compensated.
As we move to electrification, you guys have been a turnkey solution. Will the schools benefit from a turnkey solution in terms of operations and maintenance, but also installation of EV charging stations, grid upgrades as needed? How does all of that work?
Yeah, that's a really good point, Jared. Look, transportation directors for school districts look a whole lot like me, a white male, over 50, let's say, and not necessarily open to new ideas and new way of doing things. They're thinking about retirement more than they're thinking about transitioning their entire career. As the electrification journey continues, yes, the traditional transportation manager is challenged because you are, like you say, you're looking at charging infrastructure, something you've never had to think about before on the fueling infrastructure. So now you've got to put in, and then procuring electricity, and then managing that charging so that you cost effectively charge and reduce your operating costs as your expenses. And then the buses are different, not substantially different, but different. And it does require a different maintenance type of approach. We believe that more and more school districts that self-operated will begin to look at our model because that's what we do. We do bring in the entire solution. We'll bring in the charging infrastructure. We'll bring in the train mechanics to maintain not only the charging infrastructure, but the buses as it relates to that. And then one other problem, particularly for like school districts in California, is just real estate. If you got to go have a bigger piece of real estate to put in the charging infrastructure for a school district, for anybody in California to go out and acquire real estate, is a potential deal killer. Our ability to have a location where that charging infrastructure will be installed and maintained is also a potential big advantage as well.
With that charging infrastructure, do some of the smaller school districts, are they at a disadvantage? Do you guys hey, there's 3 small school districts here, we're going to build 1 yard? How does that work?
Yeah, that's a big part of a First Students model. Ideally, you get an anchor tenant, right? You get a fairly large school district that maybe has 50 plus buses, maybe 25 to 50 buses. So you get that kind of anchor client. And then you go around and you do some smaller nearby schools or charter schools or even private parochial schools. And then you put them all on one location that services multiple school districts. There you've got economies of scale right off the bat. One location rather than 5 or 6 locations, one maintenance team, one dispatch team, one training center that really brings the economics into place to make it more palatable. And then charging infrastructure, you're only working with that utility to bring in one infrastructure drop, one utility drop to one location as opposed to 5 or 6 as it goes to that. And so that's really where economies of scale come into play. If you look at First Student's footprint, like I said, across 44 states and 6 provinces, we tend to be really concentrated in urban and suburban areas where we can bring those economies of scale. The other good thing is, as we transition to electric, when a firm like First Student brings to a school district, as we do that transition, if we have 100 buses for serving a fleet, we may electrify 25 of them to start. And then we have in that 100, we have spares. So if that electric school bus develops an issue, then there are technology challenges we're still facing. We can back it up. We can roll a fossil fuel bus to make sure you're still picked up, that you're still having coverage. And when you're serving multiple school districts off one location, that's a really big benefit, is you can have a dedicated set of spare buses to cover that. And we have to do that for diesel. But believe it or not, diesel buses break down too. They have problems and we have to have spares for them. I think people only think electric vehicles have problems, but fossil fuel have plenty too. Again, that's something we look at as balancing out so we can have enough buses to cover.
If you're managing a school fleet and you're a trustee and you're looking at the budget, what is the cost of moving electric versus staying in the diesel?
Yeah, it's expensive, Jared. It's really expensive. The bus itself can be up to 3 times more expensive than a traditional fossil fuel bus. Then you have charging infrastructure that has to go on there as well. Now, in California, the 3 major investor-owned utilities out there have very progressive, very good charging infrastructure programs that defray a lot of the costs associated with charging infrastructure in those areas. And then some of the municipal utilities in California, as well as some of the co-ops, have those programs as well. But it still doesn't cover it all. And then when you look at the savings, your school buses then generate savings. You've got lower cost of fuel, lower cost as it relates to those. It still doesn't pencil out. And that's where the government grant programs come into play at the federal, state, or regional level and local level to assist with that upfront capital expenditure of both the bus and the charging infrastructure type of deal. But with time, you will reach what is known as total cost of ownership parity, where, you still have a little bit higher upfront cost of the bus, but the savings offset that upfront over its 12-year life expectancy. We think we're probably still 4 to 5 years away from reaching that TCO parity number.
Does First Student, is it a energy finance model where all that upfront infrastructure is spread out over the use, or do the school districts have to pay that upfront
No,
cost?
well, our model's typically very straightforward. We charge school districts so many dollars per day per bus we operate for them. Within that rate that we develop, that calculates in all of those costs that we have associated with that operation. And so that contract can be anywhere. I think in California now, that contract can be as long as 10 years. We can back into a 10-year program. But again, we recognize that, hey, we may only have a 5-year contract, but the good thing is if we lose that contract, we can move the buses to another location. We can even move the charging infrastructure to another location. Our charging approach we do, which is we call first charge, is all above ground. We can pick it up, put it on a truck, and move it to the next place with the buses if we need to.
What is the resiliency component to this? There's 2 parts. What happens if there's public power shutoffs and your yards, your maintenance yards where the charging infrastructure goes out? Let's start there and then we'll expand on it.
Resiliency is a very important issue to us because our mission is to safely and reliably transport your students to and from school every day. On the big grid, a big issue where the whole community is without power, right? There's been a hurricane, an earthquake, a tornado, whatever, major windstorm. Schools are going to be closed. Generally, that's not a primary concern for us because if there's no power at our yard, there's no power at the school, we're not going to have school. We'll wait till the grid's back up and then go to school. The issue we most confront is what are known as a blue sky event. At 2 o'clock in the morning, somebody has had a little bit too much to drink. They crash into the utility pole right outside of our location, knock out the power to our block, and charging's interrupted, and we can't get out there that day. That's our concern about how we deal with that. In the near term, our solution is when we build our infrastructure, we put in what's known as a manual transfer switch that allows us to plug in a generator. So we have contracts in place that occurs. We will then immediately have a generator dispatched to our location, plug that in, fire up that. And again, unfortunately, at this point in time, it is a diesel generator. We are adding to emissions, not something we want to be doing. But we have to get the school buses charged so we can run. That's how we look at those two different approaches there. Now, over time, yes, we want our resiliency built into our location itself with solar, with stationary storage batteries, all of those microgrid, so to speak, so that, yeah, we can deal with any contingency on our location, address that. And that will come with.
There's another component to this, and some of you who followed some of my questions with CCTA and other transit providers get this. It's this concept of V2, vehicle to grid, or V2X, vehicle to anything. There is a major resiliency play that school buses and electric school buses can play in that. And Kevin has been a leader at piloting some of these programs around the country. Do you want to talk about that a little bit and how that can benefit schools?
Yeah, I gotta want to thank the state of California. The California Energy Commission, 12 years ago now, funded a project that I ran that demonstrated that V2X, as you call it, Jared, which is the correct term to use now. People still, V2G is still a term. We did that with Southern California Edison down in Torrance Unified School District. Did a proof of concept. That's all it was. It wasn't to run around and have buses running every day, but to prove this could work. That school buses with the appropriate software and hardware could send their power back to the grid. And a lot of the questions we get, can the grid charge these school buses? Yes, it can easily charge these school buses, but also the school buses actually benefit the grid. They're not a draw, they're actually a net benefit. And so you're right. We're currently doing 7 pilot projects with utilities around the country, including PG&E in the Bay Area at our Richmond location, to show that this works. Buses can be a grid support and help in an emergency power outage time, but also in peak, because one of the things about school buses is we sit 80% of the hours of the year the school buses park. And that's a lot of hours. And when you match those hours up to what you're all familiar with in California on the duck curve, those buses tend to be sitting during those duck curve periods. Except at the afternoon wrap up. We're not really back at the yard till 4 or 5 o'clock in the afternoon, and the wrap up starts around 3. But after 5, we're there and could support the grid through V2X operations. And we really believe about a third of my job is working with utilities around the country. And a lot of utilities believe if we can figure out how to start with school buses, understand how to manage V2X with them, then we can start to apply V2X technology to other fleets, and then eventually all the way down to private owners, cars in their home that can support the grid.
I want to create a more clear picture for people in their heads. Is we're talking about, think about a school that the power goes off in the middle of the day, whether it's the summer and we're in crisis, or sometimes that crisis happens in May or September when people are in school and the grid is just running out of power at that moment, or there's a public power shutoff for the fire. Think about a fleet of school buses pulling up to a school and charging that school, being the energy that school does, and connecting to that so the students could turn the lights back on and continue on with their day. I really want to put that visual in here of what Kevin is talking about and how this technology can go in the future.
But it's not only schools, Jared. We're doing a project with the Tennessee Valley Authority at our Memphis, Tennessee project. I know everybody in California believes you've got the biggest earthquake risk faults there are, but the New Madrid Fault running up the East Coast, the west side of the Mississippi River in Arkansas and Missouri has actually had one of the biggest earthquakes ever recorded in U.S. history. The Mississippi River actually flowed backwards for 3 days after the earthquake there, right there in around the early 1800s. Church bells actually chimed Boston. TVA is very concerned about if that happens in the future. And one of their primary concerns is water. How are you going to get the water treatment running to keep water moving? Because without water, things get real bad, real fast. We'll be using our buses in test scenarios to go, how can the buses get over to the water treatment facility to run it, provide water, other essential services in that area. But it's also every day. It doesn't have to be a power outage. The grid is a very dynamic beast, and sometimes it needs extra electricity. The school buses can simply sitting in their parking lot can tie in and provide that extra electricity on a hot summer day. Like I said, we match up the duck curve really well. During the summer, we're sitting there on a hot July afternoon. It's really gotten heated up. The grid's starting to strain from overuse and capacity. You can draw on the buses to provide that extra cushion to get you through real peak time.
This episode will appear just after we talk to MCE, and before we talk to PG&E about peak demand and how that to get through the future, it's an everything above to manage that peak demand, or as Kevin mentioned earlier, the duck curve, the 4 to 9 p.m. as solar is lessening, but more power is actually being used.
It's a dynamic time, and we're learning a lot of ways the grid is going to be amended, reformed in order to support. And if you ever go back, there's a great book called Empire of Light, which actually is 10 or 12 years old now, maybe be over there, but it's history of Tesla, Westinghouse, and Edison. Not the companies, the people, the actual people who created the utility grid. There was this big fight between Westinghouse and Edison. Edison wanted to build all these small power plants and have all of this what we now call distributed energy. And Westinghouse was, no, let's build a big power plant outside of town and use this AC current that Tesla came up with to transmit this power over long distances. Westinghouse won. Now, Edison's name carried forward because he had the marketing stuff behind him. But now here we are 120 years later, basically back to that same argument. Are we going to do distributed energy? How are we going to do it? The flip of it, though, is during that 120-year period, the utility industry got created, spent trillions of dollars building all of this infrastructure to do AC long distance, and incredible amount of political clout. And so keeping what they have is really important to what they do, as opposed to how we're going to deal with all this electricity demand coming up. Let me tell you, I don't know if you've gotten into it yet, but the amount of electricity artificial intelligence is going to need is off the chart. I heard a statistic that, like a regular Google search, you guys, after the end of this episode, want to Google Kevin Matthews and Kevin Matthews electric school buses. That takes the electricity of a 60-watt light bulb for 40 seconds. It's the equivalent amount of electricity. If you do that using AI, I think I may get this wrong. I didn't write it down. I should have, but it's 60 light bulbs for 3 hours. It's just a huge amount more electricity to do simple little searches. That's something we're going to have to address, is what we do today is not able to support the changes there.
That's come up here, and this is off the school bus topic, but in California, economic development matters related to energy, because Google, Facebook, all of these companies are actually starting here, and they want to put at least a significant portion of servers here to manage all of that. But at the same time, we lost a Rivian manufacturing facility in Hayward, and Vacaville wants to have a technology park open, and other businesses are constantly at a loss because they can't get enough power. Housing can't be developed. Hospitals can't come online because there's not enough power supply or distribution capabilities here. And then you talk about electrifying school buses, electrifying public transit fleets, electrifying cars. That's a lot more of a power set of needs that we're going to take up here. And to do that and get to 100% renewable by 2045, that's a big curve here.
It is. It really is. And I would encourage you to watch the first student the press area, my LinkedIn page, others around First Student. Sometime in mid-October, we'll be making a pretty significant announcement about exactly what you're talking about here in partnership with the utility to really look at, hey, there's a way to do this that actually makes sense for everybody. And we're going to do a really big study to show the cost optimization of that. And people are thinking about that. I know a lot of people are just alarmist, but there are very serious, very good people at the utility industry and the transportation industry that are looking at this issue. Watch in a few weeks here, you'll see an announcement from us about how we're going to try to address that issue.
I could also recommend that book. I think Kevin, a decade ago, sent me that book, Empire of Lights, and it was great. Just fascinating history of electricity and just building out the infrastructure of this country and how it shapes everything.
Yeah, I'll lead with that. I have to tell our team, First Student, we've got 50,000 employees across North America, and this transition scares them to some extent too. Some are very aggressive, some really want to do it, but a lot are fearful of it. And they say, I don't understand. And I always turn to them and go, hey guys, I'm a history major. I'm not an electrical engineer. I barely got through the science correct of my liberal arts requirement. You don't have to be an electrical engineer to understand and do this. But you can get into it by reading some documentation, meeting with the right people, and understand it. Can you go design a new grid? Maybe not. But you can certainly implement and do this for your own community in a way that's very productive.
I want to talk about what are the advantages to the students and
Yeah.
the communities about electrifying school buses. Why is this important?
I think everybody gets pretty fluff about emissions. Every electric school bus is about 54,000 pounds of carbon a year. You multiply that times 460,000 school buses in the States. That's a huge number in and of itself right there. Plus, every time you add a school bus into a school bus's fleet, you're taking 32 cars off the road. Not only is it emissions, it's congestion issues. Then if you can do school buses, EPA has done studies that some of the most polluted places of any community in the States is 3 o'clock in the afternoon around schools. Because you got the buses sitting there idling, you got the cars sitting there idling for pickup. It's just a real bad situation. And again, then who do you have there? You have children with young developing lungs. They're breathing in more air per cubic liter of lung capacity than an adult has, 3 times more. They're bringing in more of that particulate matter. And that's why asthma rates are going up. That's what you're looking at. And now we're just talking outside the bus. Inside the bus, First Student, look, safety is our number one priority. We have a societal trust to move the future of this, literal future of this country every day to and from school. We've decided to extend that safety parameters to the air they breathe in the buses because studies have shown that air in a fossil fuel bus can be 2 to 3 times worse than outside the bus. That's a critical standpoint as well. And then to the drivers, we're very concerned about our drivers' health and improving that. And then, as I said, there are 460,000 of these. They're driving around every community in the United States, every single school day, and the impacts there. You get that, right? You get greenhouse gas reduction, emissions, children's health. One of the other benefits, though, we're beginning to see, and I want to be clear, we do not have a peer-reviewed scientific study on this as some of these other numbers I've cited out here. But it's getting to the point now where it's getting a little bit beyond anecdotal. Children's behavior is better. They are not yelling. They're not shouting on this bus. They're sitting there better behaved. And our operating theory is because it's quieter. An electric school bus is significantly quieter. They're not yelling. And when you're not yelling, you're not animated. They're calming, just like a conversation you and I are having here. And this is now being consistently reported by our drivers that the students are better behaved. The other one we're seeing with special needs children, reduction in noise is making their ride to school better. That less stimulus to them is a significant issue. That's something we didn't expect that now we're starting to see. We talked about this then early, Jared, is drivers, right? Driver recruitment is a big issue. Drivers quit for 2 primary reasons, pay and student behavior. Now just imagine you got a bus full of 72 6th graders driving through downtown San Francisco traffic at rush hour. Can you imagine many worst case scenarios than that? They quit over student behavior. If the
Mhm.
students are going to be better behaved on the bus, then that may be one less reason they quit. It may impact our driver shortage issue because drivers, hey, this isn't that bad a job. Again, these are ancillary things we're starting to see that we were not expecting as this transition began.
Wow, and think about that as a parent. I just know 3 kids is stressful in the car because 1 or 2 is always screaming or fighting, and everybody else who's a parent listening to this knows that now we're talking magnify that by 72 in a bus.
With
Yeah.
a 200, with 272-inch wheelbases, a bus that you're trying to get the corner, it's a very different challenge. And I think we all owe our school bus drivers a big thank you. And a lot of them do get it. A lot of them get it. Parents are can be very good to them.
One of the biggest advocates of electrification of school buses is the American Lung Association, American Cancer Association, and other groups like that. I think that ties into what you're talking about, right?
Yeah. As you said earlier, I've been doing this for 12 plus years. Uh, and so it's been a slog for me, but something I've really enjoyed. So when the bipartisan infrastructure bill first came on the scene, and Vice President Harris was the one who inserted provision in there to provide funding for electric school buses as a part of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, that brought in the American Lung Association, and they really helped drive the campaign. For the first time, it wasn't just a handful of yellow school bus nuts running around. It was people who really understand the human health impacts, and their commitment to getting the bipartisan infrastructure bill, followed by the Inflation Reduction Act, which also had funding in it, really made that difference and got that money to EPA that created the Clean School Bus Program. Of course, California had programs for years, had tipped to California for doing that, but that didn't allow to this nationwide expansion that we so desperately needed.
This particularly hits disadvantaged communities a little bit. Is that correct?
When you look at who rides a school bus, you do tend to see the demographics skew more toward the lower socioeconomic statuses and the disadvantaged communities. Therefore, you do tend to see the less well-off kids riding buses more than well-off kids. And both the bipartisan infrastructure bill, what EPA is doing, and really a big emphasis of the World Resources Institute, which has come onto the scene to support electric school buses, has been making sure that it's poorer communities that get the best technology first. Because most times it's the other way around. The wealthiest school districts get the best technology first. There's been and I applaud it, very concerted effort to make sure that the disadvantaged communities are first in line to receive those school buses. And first, as I said, at First Student, we operated in primarily urban environments and suburban environments, and we operate in many disadvantaged communities. We've been very pleased that the overwhelming vast majority of our electric school buses that are serving today and are coming into our fleet will be serving disadvantaged communities.
Great. We could go on talking about the grid and everything else because this just relates to a number of things. I think the final question I have in mind is when we were talking to two public transit agencies, AC Transit and County Connection, they talked about some concern about the state's goals of having every public bus by 2035 go to electric or hydrogen because they said it's a $5 billion investment. And the portion of emissions that would actually help versus a $5 billion investment in getting more people just to take public transit wasn't balanced. How does that affect your industry or just any thoughts about that overall?
Volume driven game. As volume goes up, cost comes down. First Student, we're doing everything we with our own fleet, but we're also supporting other school districts that are not our customers, helping them do this transition. We offer consulting services because every successfully deployed electric school bus helps us all. It helps us all by bringing down the cost. We need that initial investment up front to get us to that point where we talked about it earlier, TCO, total cost of ownership parity between a fossil fuel bus and an electric. Our analysis at First Student shows if we continue on this current trajectory with the bipartisan infrastructure money, the state of California puts into the program, New York has a program, Illinois, Washington, several states have programs. Add all of those up together, if those continue at the pace they're going, and we continue this pace we're on, We think about the year 2029, 2030, you will see the TCO parity number reached. And so as I said, we want to do 30,000 by the year 2030. Or deployment looks like that classic hockey stick, pretty much gradually increasing over the next 4 to 6 years here, type of deal. But then when we hit the year 2030, it starts to go up really rapid because it becomes a natural replacement cycle. It's as cost effective to buy an electric as it is to buy a fossil fuel bus. You just buy the electric. We need this period here to do that. And we do think, look, I'm selfish. I get it. I'm self-served. But school buses are different. We are transporting children. Their lungs are the most sensitive. When you look driving down the roads, a school bus is generally full. A transit bus is not always full when it's moving people. And when it is, they're older adults. Not that I'm an older adult. I want to last a while, but I'm not going to have the same impact child. Really focusing these efforts on school buses will greater impact than doing other types of vehicles as we look at things.
Is there anything else I haven't asked that you want to share and let people know?
Look, I know most of your audience here is California. We really do appreciate that. We work there to bring buses to the fleet. There are some challenges in California, especially for contractors. Some of the funding that's available from state agencies, contractors are not eligible for that, which is hurting the disadvantaged communities that we serve. As we move forward into the next legislative session in California, we'll be moving some legislation on that and hope your members audience will take a look at that and understand that all yellow school buses are eligible for this funding, not just those owned by school districts, because we all transport the same kids. We want to make that a reality for all the children who ride buses in California. And I think the other kind of surprising thing, when you look at California, very progressive state, the People's Republic of California, often referred to. But your student transportation approach is not that high the list, because over the funding crisis as California has had, the student transportation component of it taken real heavy hits. If we can really work to get more students transported on school buses, it's going to help everybody because it reduces emissions. But before, every time we can add a school bus, it takes 35 cars off the road. And so we all know that it's not only emissions, but just traffic, which I hear everybody in California complain about every time I'm out there. There's some things I think we can all do together, just microly focused in California, let alone nationally.
Don't worry, we've stopped the transportation problem since you were last here. It's all good. Nobody has traffic. Yeah, keep us posted on that legislation as we go into 2025. We'll share the word with some of the school districts and
would appreciate it.
All right, Kevin Matthews from First Student. We appreciate your time here today.
You as well, Jared. Thanks for having me.
Wait, don't leave yet. Hit subscribe. Make sure you get the weekly updates. We have a new episode every Wednesday for stuff happening in the East Bay. In the meantime, follow me on LinkedIn, Jared Asch, or check out our firm where we have a weekly newsletter and blog at Capstone Government Affairs on LinkedIn. Thanks for joining us today on the Capstone Conversation.